G'day mates, it's B-Buster here, and I would like to give Cerebral a big shout out for sponsoring this episode. Mental health is incredibly important in everyone's life. Did you know that last year rates of anxiety and depression doubled in the US? And with psychiatrist visits costing up to $500 per session, and traditional therapy visits over $100 per session, in my mind, the system just isn't keeping pace with the needs of our communities. Enter Cerebral. Cerebral is an online mental health service that offers prescription medication, counseling, and therapy for anxiety, depression, ADHD, insomnia, and more. I know from personal experience with family members the difference that therapy can make for the lives of others. The quest for self-improvement is a steep one, but it's well worth the effort. It's commendable to receive a helping hand in order to work at being the best version of yourself. And with Cerebral, you can make that step today. With Cerebral, you can connect with your counselor and therapist on your own schedule through your laptop or the Cerebral mobile app. You can schedule sessions based on what's most convenient for you. You don't have to wait weeks to be seen, and they're also one of the few services that provides prescription medication online through a licensed provider, and even ships medication straight to your door, so you can skip the pharmacy lines. The treatments are affordable at only 1/3 of the traditional price, and for listeners of this program, you can receive 65% off your first month of medication management and care counseling at cerebral.com/bescaredpod. Go to cerebral.com/bescaredpod for 65% off your first month. That's just a total of $30 to get started. Join Cerebral today on their mission to make quality mental health accessible and affordable for all. So, a group of friends and myself rented a place on a lake for just a fun-filled drunken weekend. We were all in our young to mid-20s, and it was supposed to be just a big party. For the most part, that's what it was too. The Friday night and Saturday morning, we pretty much went all out, having a blast on the water and just having fun really, stupid stuff. And well, naturally, when Saturday afternoon rolled around, we were all so dead from going out that we decided that it would be a night of no drinking, maybe a little bit of smoking, and just kind of having a chill evening and night. But that's what it was too, relaxed. So 9 p.m. comes rolling around, and about 8 of us were inside of the house and 5 outside. The house was a 2-story with a second-story back or sort of deck porch, and it was surrounded by woods, and then down through the woods you would then hit the lake. I'll mention too that we had already experienced some weird vibes from the locals when we first arrived in town, mostly just backcountry old-timers that I assumed were leering and irritated because we were a bunch of college-age kids looking to have a good time. But the town and the lake were large, so it's not like anyone knew where we were staying. Anyways, 3 of my friends were on the upstairs back porch, and my other friend and I, we were downstairs outside just talking on this little old table near the woods. I mean, it was otherwise just a really nice night. My friend and I were just getting lost in the conversation, and all of a sudden there was this weird feeling that encompassed us, like an unnerving physical experience that came from the woods behind us. It was so strong, in fact, that we both kind of quieted down, and then, out of nowhere, this loud chanting abruptly comes from the woods. I have no idea how far away it was because of the way the lake is set up, but I'm pretty sure the voice is carried up through the forest, and it sounded like a cult chanting away, and all of the voices were male. I mean, they were loud and perfectly in sync. I think we were frozen for all of 20 seconds before I just couldn't contain myself and darted towards the house with her following me. I don't know how to explain it too, the feeling that came with that chanting, but it was almost, I don't know, evil. Like, just something powerfully uninviting. I was shaking by the time that we got to the second story, though, and ran out onto the balcony with the other 3 friends. One of them was my brother, and by the time that we got up there, the chanting was gone, and I naturally asked, "Did you guys hear that?" And in the most shaky, freaked-out voices, they all said that they had heard it too, and not seconds later, the chanting began again. So, The five of us are out there, peering into the forest, listening to this chanting that would sometimes sound far away and then also sound relatively close. All male voices in the weirdest language, or I don't even know what it was, to be honest. Sounded like a strange, church or something. Then, following the chanting, a loud bang like someone hit a huge metal object sounded, and then the worst part came. A man wailing, like in extreme pain. All of my hair was up on end, and it was the freakiest experience that I've ever had. My brother and I were staring at each other in a mixture of scared excitement and horror. The wailing stopped all of a sudden, and then it was back to the chanting, which eventually died out. I was so freaked out by it that I wanted to call the cops because whoever screamed had been in a lot of pain. That much was obvious. That, mixed with the weird chanting, just made me immediately think of some terrible sacrifice going on. One friend tried to say that it had to be some drunk guys just messing around singing and being weird, but no way was that coming from some drunk guys. They were perfectly in sync. Then the bang, and then the wail of pain like that. And then all that weird tension and energy was just gone. No. I didn't call the cops, and to be honest, I wish that I would have, but the forest was so large, and since the lake house was up looking down at the woods and the lake as well, it really could have been anywhere. It definitely wasn't in our close proximity, but it was close enough to hear all of that perfectly. After this, though, we just went in and got some of the others, but by the time that they came out, the chanting had stopped. Someone wanted to go and explore and find out where it had been coming from, but obviously that was a stupid idea. After that, I was really ready to go home, and I can't explain the relief of driving away from there the next morning. Even now, it gives me the worst feeling thinking about it. Whatever it was, it felt so wrong and evil, and I'll never forget that moment. I can only imagine that it was some weird cult stuff, but maybe it was a lot worse. I was working at my first job ever in retail. I was around 20 years old. It was a busy morning, 9 a.m., somewhere mid-December, hence why it was so busy. And I was working the checkouts as per usual, scanning items, ringing up customers, and all that jazz. About an hour into my shift, I think, I was serving an elderly man who bought just a handful of items. After giving him his subtotal, another guy behind him, smelling of booze, stretched out, handed me cash, and I kindly told him that I wasn't serving him. I was serving the man in front of him. Then I looked down and saw that he was buying some cheap knockoff branded Baileys, some booze, and of course I figured that this guy was pretty much wasted. Now, just as I was taking payment from the elderly man, I was planning in my head how I was going to tell this next guy that I can't sell alcohol to him as he's already drunk. And as this was my first job and I'd never encountered this sort of thing before, I was feeling a bit anxious. So I finished serving, and now on to the drunk guy. I looked around in hopes to find another colleague, or my manager perhaps, but there wasn't one in sight or available to help, so I just sort of looked at the man, and just before I opened my mouth, I felt like someone grabbed a fistful of my hair and something sharp poking me in the back. And of course, a man whispered in my ear, to which I also smelled alcohol on his breath. "Serve my mate." He pushes, which I'm assuming was a knife, harder into my back now, and then says, "Now." In complete shock, I said nothing, just scanned the bottle, took the cash, and then they were gone. I quickly turned around to my colleague working checkouts behind me, but all they did was look at me and ask if I was okay, completely unaware of what had just happened. Then I went for a break. I see my manager pass by, so I rushed over to him and told him what had just happened. All he did was laugh because he thought that I was joking, but criticized me for selling alcohol to someone under the influence. Whatever that sharp object that was in my back cut me, though, Before my break, I could feel blood running down my back, and it was really sore. Of course, I couldn't see blood as my uniform is black, but I screamed, "It's true, it did happen." I turned around and lifted my hair, as I have very long hair, and said, "Lift up my shirt, or get my female colleague to do it. This guy sliced me." But the manager just said, "Yuck, no, I don't want to see you lift up your shirt," and just walked away staring into his phone. Well, I didn't return to finish my shift. I snuck out of the store, took a taxi and went home, and my mum cleaned up my back and dressed it. But then the next morning she called work to tell them that I wasn't going to be returning, as the manager's incompetence to take action when I could have almost been stabbed over a bottle was just not good enough. When my sister and oldest brother were younger, but my sister was around 10 and my oldest brother is 3 years younger than her, my mum was a single mother having to raise them both. She took public transport to work. She said that there were a lot of shady characters that she met. Her worst fear, being a 5'3" girl weighing about 110 pounds, was that someone would start a confrontation with her or follow her home. Now, one night, after picking my brother and sister up from daycare, they headed home and my mum was shocked to find that the front door was unlocked. This was strange because she always locked her doors, but that particular morning she had been running late and figured that she must have just forgot. Heading into the house, my mum just couldn't shake the feeling that something was off as she entered her room, and that's when she noticed that her dresser drawer was open and her socks and pantyhose and underwear had obviously been rifled through. She asked my sister, who's blind, if she had been digging around in her dresser looking for something. My sister told her that she wouldn't dare go into her room as it was off limits, and if she had, what could she have possibly wanted out of her dresser? Just to be sure as well, she asked my brother if he went into her room, and my brother scoffed at the accusation. My mother then began to search under her bed, in her bathroom, and then her closet. And when she opened the closet door, the bedroom light cast just enough light inside to see the shape of a man sitting down in the floor of her closet, a pair of pantyhose pulled over his face to hide any identifying facial features. While the mental image of the man with the pantyhose pulled over his head might sound hilarious, the sounds of a small woman desperately closing the door and trying to keep it shut as this man began slamming his fists against the door while she screamed at her children to hide and call the police is anything but hilarious. I think the only reason this man didn't overpower my mother right away was because she slid down to the floor and had pushed her legs against the nearby dresser to steady herself. She soon could feel him slamming his full weight against the door, and she screamed out again for my brother and sister to hide and call the police. My brother was too afraid to leave my mother alone and stayed in the room, while my sister headed down the hallway and managed to find her way to the landline and dialed 911. My mother tried her best to keep the door shut, but eventually the man had thrown his weight against the door so much, forcing my mum to slide forward and, by default, push the dresser further and further back until it was just too far back to keep my mum wedged between it and the closet. The man finally pushed against the door hard enough that he managed to get the advantage as my mother felt the door being forced open. She cut her losses though and stood up, quickly running towards my brother to grab him. The man fell into the ground as the door swung open and quickly scrambled to his feet, pushing the two out of the way as he just bolted out the front door. When the police arrived, he was obviously long gone and they never found the guy. The police searched the house to see how he got in and to see if he had an accomplice with him or stuff like that. But the only thing that they could deduce is that he got in because my mother forgot to lock the door. My mum figured the man was trying to rob them and hid in her closet when they heard them come home, but the police stated that the only thing he had gone through was my mother's dresser drawer and also a drawer in the kitchen. Because in the closet that he was hiding in, they found one of my mother's kitchen knives. They wanted my mother to give a description, but she couldn't as she never clearly got a good look at his face. After that happened, my mother ended up getting a Norwegian elk hound puppy to train as a guard dog, and she, as far as she knows, never encountered the man from her closet ever again. But a part of her always wondered if he knew where she lived, because he was one of the many faces that rode that public transport with her all those years ago. So this happened when I was about 10, I think. For background, I grew up on a rural 18-acre farm out in the middle of nowhere with my little sister and my mother. Occasionally, at night, my father would show up. Long story, but oftentimes, it was just us three. Our property was shaped like a big rectangle almost, with our house on the very edge of the property with a dirt and limestone road in front of it, and the rest of the property extended back behind us. We had some unfriendly neighbours across the dirt road from us, and after that there were some mobile homes a few miles away on the right and the left. My room was in the back of the house with a large window looking out at our fenced backyard that the sheep were in, and then after that there was another fence with a pasture for the goats, and onwards to another pasture with a fence for our ponies. This is relevant too, because in order for anything to be in our backyard, you would have to get past at least one of those fences. Now, one night I was playing with my action figures on the floor around bedtime when I heard a weird knocking noise coming from my window, and I always had the blinds shut at night because I was scared of the dark at that time. Being so young, I immediately panicked and ran into my mum's room in the front of the house and hysterically told her what had happened. She came over to my room and popped the blinds up and looked around, but there was nothing there except for some sheep in the distance. Since we lived in a pretty wooded area, my mother assured me that it was probably just an animal knocking against the wood of our house. And to be honest, this satisfied me at that moment, and I just went back to bed shortly after. A few weeks went by, and occasionally I would hear knocking on my window, which would freak me out, but since I was assured that it was just an animal, I would just go back to sleep. A few more weeks went by, and I hadn't heard anything for a while until one night, very, very late at night, I was awoken by a really loud knocking from what sounded like the glass on my window. This was weirder than normal, but still wasn't overly scary to me. Still, I decided that this particular knock needed an investigation since it sounded so much louder than all the other ones. So I hopped out of bed and creeped up to the window and popped the bottom blind up to see if I could finally spot this animal. And what I saw still gives me shivers to this day. What I saw was a pair of bare human feet with dirty blue jeans and their waist up, obscured by the rest of the blinds. Then, to my mounting horror, the legs shifted and the torso leaned down as the person standing behind my window was attempting to look in through the slot in the blinds that I had made. I screamed as loud as I ever have and ran shrieking past my sister's room, through the living room, the kitchen, and into my mother's bedroom. This sent all the dogs scrambling through the house barking, and woke my sister, who also ran crying, to my mum's room. Luckily for us, my mum was up doing work on her laptop, and through my sobs I explained what happened. To my mother's credit, she took me seriously and locked us all in the bathroom and called 911. We stood there crouched in the bathtub with her for what seemed like hours as the cops tried to find where our house was down the twisting country roads. They eventually showed up, looked around the property, and they found human footprints in the sand outside my window, but nothing else. We ended up leaving for a while to stay at my grandma's house in town, but eventually we went back home after a week. My mother ended up buying an axe, but that was all the protection that we had since she was a major hippie and didn't believe in owning firearms and stuff. There were a few more incidences with knocking, but each time my mum would check, there was never any person there again, which, to be honest, I'm thankful for. To this day, I always shut the blinds at night, and I never look past the blinds when it's dark.